Hey guys, today I wanted to talk a little bit about a recent book I read um, by the Marquis de Sade, Justine, or The Misfortunes of Virtue, what this book is called. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Marquis de Sade himself, and also just a little bit about the book. Not too much synopsis, but a little bit, just because I want to be able to dive into everything here that came across my mind when I read the book. So yeah, and then we'll talk a little bit about just like synthesizing some of those thoughts. But anyways, I have a little sheet I'm going to be reading off of. So I don't know how to say his real name, but I think it's like Donatien Alphonse Francois de Sade. Is his full name. He was born in 1740 as an aristocrat. He was educated in the Enlightenment world. He was formally educated, but also he did go to military academy at age 14 to serve the king. He was only there for a little bit and he dropped out, and he started to have a bit more of a bad relationship with his father. But eventually he got married at age 17, and his wife suffered many of the libertine desires of the Marquis while she was married to him. But from this moment on, pretty much the Marquis's life was just wrought with crimes and prison sentences. He spent a lot of his life in prison. He spent a lot of his authorial life in prison. Most of his books were published and written from his prison cell. And many of his crimes were recounted in his novels, albeit to varying degrees of truth to his own life, but pretty much the same things as what he did in his life. So Justine, the book itself, was officially published in 1791, and it faced a lot of backlash and censorship, but the novel still sold really well, which I find pretty interesting, because even today, I mean, I don't know how well this would do, but apparently people in France in the Enlightenment age were pretty curious, we'll say, about the life of a libertine. There's some funny contemporary reviews in the introduction to this Oxford edition of Justine, and one of them talks about one of the reviews saying pretty much nobody should read this except very mature men, and they should only read it to bear witness to the insanities of humanity and just how weird and crazy some of our passions and our desires are. And then once you're done with the book, to basically throw the book in the fire so that it can't exist any further past in your mind. Which is funny because I'm kind of making this video to put my thoughts on the book out there forever. So yeah. His works would again receive praise in the 20th century in France from the absurdists and the surrealists. Most notably Guillaume Apollinaire, I think is how you say his name. He was the guy he was an artist, he was a poet, I think he was somewhat of a novelist. He worked with Picasso a little bit, actually, which is pretty interesting to me. I have read one of his poetry collections, The Bestiary of Orpheus, and that was pretty interesting. Yeah, Picasso made drawings for The Bestiary, but Apollinaire actually didn't really like it, which is funny to me. But anyways, yeah, he did a lot of work to get the Marquis de Sade's works published again for a second time in the 20th century in France. He had a lot of interest in it, and he also helped translate, I believe, some of his works. But to get into the book, Basically, Justine follows the miserable yet virtuous life of an orphaned French girl of the book's namesake. And pretty much every new scene and cast of characters seeks to harm her or take advantage of her, either through violence or sexual violence. Sometimes it's just robbery, which is weird to say, but yeah. She recounts these tales to a pair of strangers who are a part of the few sympathetic characters in the novel. There's only like 4 characters in the book that are not at one point in time seeking to harm Justine. Essentially, you follow this girl from being accused falsely of trying to rob and kill somebody and going to jail, and then getting freed from jail by a group of bandits, and then they try to coerce her into their group and basically force her into their group. All of the all of the rogues is how this puts them. All of the rogues basically just want her for their own pleasure. And at this point in time in the novel, she's still very young, and she still has yet to experience that way of life. I guess that she has yet to experience that side of humanity, we'll say. And then we just follow her from escaping this group, trying to help somebody while she's escaping, and then getting robbed and raped, and then can't really remember what happens next. Oh yeah, and then she gets involved with this very wealthy man who plots to kill his aunt, essentially, and she, of course, wants nothing to do with it. Her archetype in this whole book is literally that of a godlike, well, maybe not godlike, but godlike in the sense of virtue, but not godlike in the sense of being a savior. She is just someone who will not bend to any of the desires of the people around her. Well, as far as we know, she has none of those sexual desires herself, but she doesn't falter at all in her virtue. And then eventually she escapes them after the murder plot is carried out anyways, regardless of her trying to stop it. She makes her way to a doctor who is also a libertine. Every single person she finds her way to is a degenerate. And then she makes her way to this monastery where, of course, the monks themselves are also libertines, which isn't really surprising. Basically, she just keeps running into these groups of people, hoping that they might be of reason or of some sort of savior to her. And each time they turn out to be just exactly the same of the villain archetype in the book, which is that of a libertine. Eventually, she does get to the end of her story, and we come to find out, this is the only like big spoilery thing in the book, but we come to find out that she's actually related to one of the girls that she's telling her story to, and it's actually her sister from back when she was orphaned. But yeah, we'll talk more about the ending in a bit, but basically each one of these villains in the book takes the time to explain just the general ethics and the rights men have over other men in the Age of Enlightenment and atheism, which to me is sort of like the Marquis kind of playing with the philosophies of the time period and seeing how far you can stretch these ideas up to the point where it's just perceived as this sort of insanity, sexual violence and things like that, and the rights that we have over other people. Essentially, their arguments are like this. So, nature has the highest pragmatic authority over us. Our desires come solely from nature, and nature would not seek to harm itself. So, our desires could not truly harm nature or the inhabitants of nature. So basically, we can do whatever we want, as long as you have power over the person that you're trying to take advantage of. And it made me think of one of the first definitions of justice that Socrates encounters in the Republic. That being, justice is the interest of the stronger. And I kind of wanted to read a few excerpts that just show a little bit of these ideas. So this is one of the group of bandits that has just saved Justine from prison, and then now they're trying to coerce her into their group. And one of them says, "This virtue that you make such a fuss about is of no use in this world. There's no point in kneeling before its altars, because its vain incense will not feed you. In this world, my child, men value only those things that can earn money or bring pleasure. What can we profit from the virtue of women? Now, how can a little girl like you repay what is done for her, except by allowing others to use her body how they wish?" This quote is particularly interesting because it's actually a woman talking. She is part of this group of bandits, and she has bought into these ideas and this philosophy, and it just shows you a little bit of how power dynamics work, and this sort of atheistic morality and Enlightenment morality, where nature is put at the top of the food chain, I guess. From page 87. This one is basically talking about how we should just get rid of law in general. If we have atheism as our worldview, then moral law kind of runs in the way of that. Maybe because where do morals come from? But, quote, if you allow crimes, no one complains, since he who likes such acts quietly indulges in them, and he who doesn't care about them either manifests a kind of indifference towards them that is in no way painful. Thus everybody in a crime-ridden society is either very happy, or is in a state of unconcern that is not harmful. Consequently, there is nothing good, nothing respectable, nothing that can make people happy in what we call virtue. So essentially, when the afterlife doesn't exist, and there's no reward for virtue, all we have is what's right in front of us, and this world is all that we own, then what exactly is the point of virtue? This book kind of, I don't know, this book is weird. It's a lot of the Marquis de Sade's own philosophies and ideas, but I don't know, they kind of work against him. Like, I don't know, he poses some important questions, and we'll get to those. So I'll just I got one more quote for you, and then we'll be done here. So, but what does that say? 28. Okay, from page 28. This is the first argument against religion. So, believe me, you should abandon God's justice, his punishments or rewards to come. All that these platitudes are good for is to make us die of hunger. We are all born equal in nature, Therese, and if it pleases fate to undermine this first article of general law, it is of use to us to correct such whims and to use our talents to counter the usurpations of those stronger than us. It is very hard to keep stealing when one has 3 times what one needs to live. Again, a little bit of a question posed for the necessity of crime. Basically using these overarching structures and ideas that are tangible as our highest good, or as our action. But Justine nevertheless must escape these libertines and go against nature to save her own life. She has to go against nature itself, and by the end of the book, again, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but Justine is things are finally starting to look up for her. She's with people who respect her, and she's with people who are willing to do good for her. And eventually one day there's a bad storm, and Justine is actually struck by lightning and she dies. And it's kind of interesting because it seems very silly when I just tell you the facts of the plot like that, because it seems very incidental. But I think there's a purpose to it. First of all, it's a very big Deus Ex Machina, which I think works pretty well, and also it kind of brings about the argument for nature as the supreme power in the world again, because lightning, I guess, would be a part of nature, something that is born of nature, and at the end of the day, Justine tries to escape nature and the nature of men, and nature finally strikes her down, just like, you know, God would. We often assume like being struck down by lightning is a sign of God, but that's not necessarily true. And I think it's interesting because I'm pretty sure that's basically what the Marquis is arguing here, is that the machinations of this world are not derived from God, which I think is true. At this point in time, we've kind of gone past the need for a deity at all. A little bit before that, of course, you know, we have God as the divine clockmaker who just basically pushed the first domino and started this chain reaction of events, and he kind of just is a silent observer to it all. But I think it's interesting that he points out here that it's nature itself that acts with nature. Of course, God could too, but I think most importantly, it's sort of the will of nature that concerns things that are a part of nature, and that's why we do have the supernatural, the things that exist outside of nature. But yeah, the Marquis raises some really interesting questions about the ethical limits of atheism and the ethical limits within the age of reason. And it makes perfect sense why the French surrealists would admire such a person as him, seeing as how he would be countering these Enlightenment ideas to some degree, and also just being as transgressive as he is, and seeing how he can justify the actions of his life and the actions of his characters that are just absolutely horrible. And I wrote here on my sheet, like, the atrocities in this book are enough to make anyone hope for a true morality, or conversely submit to the absurdities of life stoically and allow any and all actions to be permissible, which I kind of think is the route that most of the French surrealists would take. I think there's some value to absurdity, but that's just awful as well. One thing I was a little bit disappointed about, but maybe it's just the nature of this book, is there's no real in-depth arguments from a Christian perspective. He spends a lot of time attacking Christianity, as far as, you know, it seems like that's what he's doing, but there's no arguments from characters in support of Christianity as much as there is going against it, or supporting ideas that would not exist or cannot exist under any sort of moral rule. And Justine in the book, she is the Christian. She is the virtuous. She is the virtuous one, and she is more so an objector rather than someone who's going out and debating with these villains in the book. But we do get a little bit. We do get a little bit of it. I wanted to point out one quote here. Why then would I deny him, God? Why would I ignore the God who is so necessary to my happiness? Why would I prefer to say, like the soul who has strayed, there is no God, when the heart of the reasonable man at every moment offers me proofs of existence of this divine being? It is better, therefore, to dream with those who are mad than to reason with the wise. Everything is deducible from this first principle. Once God exists, this God deserves to be worshipped, and the basis of this faith is incontestably virtue. So from this quote, I think it's basically saying that with this atheistic worldview, I guess I should first say, it's basically dividing the world into the two dichotomies of deism and atheism. And when on the side of atheism, you have nothing except the immediate. And on the side of Christianity or deism, you have the side of the ethical and the virtuous. And in the world where there's only atheism, then there can be no virtue. And in the world with God, where it's only God, there is only virtue in that world, and faith is also present in that world, which is really interesting to me. As much as these books argue in support of a lack of religion, it almost to me argues the opposite as well, which is an amazing achievement of any fictional work. Or I shouldn't even say fictional. It's an amazing achievement of any work at all. And this book is very much one argument. So it does get kind of repetitive. The scenes get very repetitive. I was kind of comparing it to Shelley's Frankenstein, where it's like every time a new character is introduced in Frankenstein, you know what's going to happen to that character. They're probably going to get killed by the monster, and pretty much that's what happens each time. It's like, and I feel like Justine is somewhat the same there. But as far as the sweet and lowdown of this book, the nitty gritty as far as the writing style goes, the detriments of the book are that it is very repetitious, but I think it kind of has to be to serve the book. And same with the general obscenity and vulgarity in the book. It kind of has to be that way to fully argue what it wishes to argue, I think. Because of the repetitious nature, I do think it maybe could be a little shorter, but the book is already fairly short. It's like less than 300 pages. The Marquis de Sade has written much longer works than that. The ending is kind of rushed. I mean, most of this book is basically Justine just retelling her life. I feel like it's on like the last 30 pages maybe are the actual ending of the book, which is interesting. I don't know that it's done poorly, and I don't know that I would wish for a longer ending, but it did somewhat feel rushed. The last sentence in the book is kind of interesting. I won't read it. I was gonna say I'll encourage you guys to go read the book, but I don't know. I don't know if I can really do that, especially because I don't know the Marquis de Sade himself was just a strange guy. I don't know. He definitely was not a virtuous person, but yeah. I mean, I was just on Wikipedia reading about his life and some of the purported crimes that he committed, some of the specific ones, and I was like, oh yeah, I read about that. I read about that in this book. So yeah, I don't know, if you are particularly interested and you are in a state where you think you could receive this work well, then yeah, I guess I would suggest reading it. Part of the reason why I am making this video is because I wanted something to come out of this book that was somewhat good. So the first one I've read by him, I'm interested in reading the 120 Days of Sodom. I don't really know if I want to read anything else by him, at least right now. I know he has that really big one, the Juliet, I think it's called. Um, it's interesting to me only because it's a big book, but I don't know if I will read any more of him besides Sodom, but yeah, Marquis de Sade. Also, this is a great cover. I really like it, but